Let me tell you what it looks like when a prince loses. Not a battle, not a skirmish, not a public relations dispute played out across breakfast television with two presenters and a sofa, and someone reading tweets from viewers in Swindon. No. A courtroom. A judge. A ruling. Cold, clinical, and final. That strips away the last legal mechanism a man had been using to fight the most powerful institution in the world, from 5,000 miles away in Southern California. In 2023, and carrying devastatingly into 2024, Prince Harry's legal strategy, the strategy he had described publicly as his most important mission, the fight he said he was waging not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been crushed by an unaccountable press and an untouchable establishment, began to collapse. One case, then another, then the appeals, then the quiet, heavy silence from Montecito that tells you more than any prepared statement ever could. But here is the detail that the headlines buried, the detail that changes everything about how you read this story, the details that the papers covered briefly, the broadcasters skipped past entirely, and the palace, very deliberately, never commented on. The British establishment, the Home Office, the Metropolitan Police, the legal teams that outmaneuvered Harry at every single turn, did not build their strategy in isolation. They did not arrive at their positions independently. There was a climate, a coordinated, carefully maintained, fingerprint-free climate. And the question that royal insiders have been whispering since 2024, over lunch in Mayfair and walks through St. James's Park, is a devastatingly simple one. How much did William know? And when did he know it? Tonight, we are following the legal paper trail all the way to the palace doors. And what we find there will change how you see both brothers and the institution they were both born into forever. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like. We do forensic royal commentary here. No fluff, no gossip columns dressed up as analysis. We read the court documents. We track the institutional machinery. We follow the money and the power. And if that is the kind of unfiltered truth you are here for, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe, like, and let's get into it. To understand why Harry's legal battles matter beyond the tabloid noise, beyond the headlines about feuds and fallouts and he said, she said palace drama, you need to understand what Harry was actually trying to do. And more importantly, what he was trying to prove. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in January 2020, in what the British press immediately and gleefully branded Megxit, they surrendered their publicly funded security detail. The Metropolitan Police's Royalty and Specialist Protection Unit, known internally as RASP, was withdrawn. That is standard procedure for non-working royals. Nobody disputed the mechanism. What Harry disputed, with every legal tool available to him, was the motive. Harry argued that this was not a routine administrative decision made by bureaucrats following protocol. He argued it was a punishment, a deliberate, calculated removal of protection designed to make his life outside the institution functionally untenable, to force him back into the fold, or to neutralize him entirely by making any return to the United Kingdom physically dangerous for his family. Think about that for a moment. A man argued in formal legal submissions to British courts that his own family's institution had removed his children's safety as a bargaining chip. That is not the language of a disgruntled former employee. That is the language of someone who believes they are at war. And so, Harry filed lawsuits. Multiple, simultaneous, extraordinarily expensive lawsuits that ran concurrently across different jurisdictions and different areas of law, requiring an army of legal professionals and a level of personal financial commitment that would have broken most people before the first hearing was even scheduled. He went after Mirror Group newspapers for phone hacking, a case he actually won in 2023, becoming the first senior royal to testify in a British court in over a century. 100 years. Think about what it takes, what kind of anger, what kind of conviction to be the first member of the royal family in 100 years to sit in a witness box and face cross-examination. Harry did that, and he won. The judge found that his phone had been hacked, that journalists had obtained private information about him through unlawful means. That was a real victory. A genuine, documented, legally verified moment of accountability for an industry that had been operating without meaningful consequence for decades. He then went after the Home Office and the Executive Committee for the Protection of Royalty, a body that sounds like something from a John le Carré novel, but is in fact a very real, very powerful government committee, arguing that he had a right to police protection even as a non-working royal, and that he should be permitted to fund that protection privately if the state chose not to fund it themselves. The argument was elegant in its simplicity. Harry was not asking for a handout. He was not demanding that taxpayers pay for his Californian lifestyle. He was saying, "Let me pay for it myself. Let me hire protection. Let me bring my family home safely." The committee said no. And Harry asked the courts why. He also pursued action against the Metropolitan Police itself, in connection with allegations about unlawful information gathering by private investigators working on behalf of sections of the British press. The tentacles of this particular case stretched back decades, to a culture of surveillance and interception that the phone hacking scandal had only partially exposed. Harry framed all of this publicly, consistently, and with considerable rhetorical force as a war for truth, a war for accountability, a war he was fighting not just for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, but for every ordinary person who had ever had their voicemail accessed by a journalist chasing a story. Every grieving parent, every crime victim, every minor celebrity whose private life had been harvested without consent. Harry said he was their champion. He said the legal system was the arena, and he was prepared to fight to the last. It was the most ambitious legal strategy ever mounted by a member of the British royal family against the British state. And the establishment, with its centuries of practice in these matters, watched it unfold with the patient confidence of an institution that has survived considerably more than one angry duke. And in 2024, Harry's legal strategy began to come apart. The security case was the one Harry cared about most. Not the phone hacking, not the press, the security case, because it was the most personal. It was the one that cut closest to the bone. He had argued in his memoir, in interviews, and in formal legal submissions that he could not bring his family back to the United Kingdom without the protection he had previously held as a working royal. That his children, Archie and Lilibet, would grow up effectively estranged from their grandfather's country. That every visit required a level of private security coordination that was both financially unsustainable and operationally inferior to the state protection he had once received. That his children were being denied their heritage not by accident, but by design. In February 2024, the Court of Appeal delivered its ruling on the security case. Harry lost. The judges found that the decision-making process around his security arrangements had been lawful. That the RAVEC committee, the body that determines who receives state protection and at what level, had acted within its remit. The committee, the court found, had followed its own procedures. Whether those procedures were fair, whether they were proportionate, whether they reflected the institutional bias that Harry alleged, that was not the court's concern. The process had been followed. Harry lost. His legal team announced they would seek to appeal further. They said they remained confident. They issued the statement that losing legal teams always issue, full of resolve and forward momentum. But the energy had shifted. The legal momentum that had made Harry look like a genuine institutional threat in 2023, the momentum of the mirror verdict, the momentum of a man who had actually walked into a British court and made powerful people uncomfortable, that momentum had visibly, undeniably, stalled. And then came the settlement that nobody fully expected. The settlement that, more than any court ruling, told the full story of where Harry's legal war had arrived. In early 2024, Harry settled his lawsuit against the publisher of the Sun News Group newspapers. After years of declaring publicly that he would fight to the absolute end, after positioning himself as the man who would finally break Rupert Murdoch's British press empire open and force it to account for decades of unlawful behaviour. After explicitly, repeatedly, on the record, stating that he would not settle, that he would go to trial, that he would put executives in the witness box and extract the truth through cross-examination. He settled, out of court, with a statement from the publisher that was widely described as an apology. And here is where you have to be careful, because the settlement was not nothing. The apology was real. Newsgroup Newspapers, the publisher of The Sun, the most widely read tabloid newspaper in Britain, the paper that had savaged Harry and Meghan throughout their years of royal service and beyond, issued a public apology. That happened. That was documented. That was history. But the optics told a different story. Because Harry had not merely suggested he would fight, he had made it a cornerstone of his public identity. The man who would not be bought off. The man who would not be managed. The man who would stand in that courtroom and force the truth into the public record regardless of personal cost. That was Harry who had written Spare. That was Harry who had sat with Oprah. That was Harry who had built an entire narrative around his refusal to go quietly. And then, he went quietly. Quietly enough that Newsgroup got to issue the apology on its own terms, through its own lawyers, without a trial, without discovery, without testimony, without the months of public examination that Harry had promised would expose the full depth of institutional corruption in the British press. Royal watchers, and crucially, the British press who had been dreading a full trial for years, immediately began asking why. The answer that emerged from sources close to both parties was quietly devastating in its implications. Harry had been advised that a full trial posed risks not just to the defendants, but to Harry himself. That documents and testimonies and disclosures that would emerge during the discovery process could be as damaging to the Duke of Sussex as to the newspaper he was pursuing. There were things, apparently, in the record that Harry's legal team had reviewed in detail that made a full public hearing a gamble neither side could fully control. Harry settled because continuing was more dangerous than stopping. The man who had gone to war with the establishment and had made the war his entire brand blinked. Not because he was forced to, not because he ran out of money, but because the full truth, it turns out, is a weapon that cuts both ways. Now here is where the story moves from the courtroom to the palace. Because these legal defeats did not happen in a vacuum. They did not happen in some sealed-off procedural world that exists independently of royal politics. And that is what most of the coverage has fundamentally failed to reckon with. In Harry's security case, his argument that the state owed him protection, or at minimum that he should be permitted to purchase it privately, was decided by a government committee, a committee that operates under ministerial oversight. In a government that maintains a close, continuous, constitutionally embedded relationship with the sovereign. The monarch is briefed, the heir is consulted. The lines of communication between Buckingham Palace and the relevant government departments are not merely informal, they are structural. They are centuries old. They are part of how the British state actually functions, as distinct from how it functions on paper. Nobody inside Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace pulled a lever and said, "Rule against Harry." That is not how the British establishment operates. It never has been. It is far more subtle than that. It is ambient. It is atmospheric. It operates through the careful calibration of what is said and, more importantly, what is not said. Through the management of tone and emphasis in conversations that never appear in any document. Through the quiet withdrawal of support that is never formally announced, but is nonetheless felt at every level of every institution involved. What royal insiders describe carefully, with significant qualification, in the kind of language that always leaves a line of retreat, is a climate. A climate in which the institution made clear, through channels that leave absolutely no fingerprints, that Harry's return to royal life on his own terms was not something the Crown would facilitate. That the legal campaign would be allowed to run its course. That the courts would do what the courts would do. And that the palace would watch. and wait. And who is the crown in operational terms in 2024? Not Charles, who is managing his own health, his own diminished energy, his own careful repositioning of an institution that nearly came apart in the years after Diana's death. Increasingly, as anyone following the internal mechanics of the modern monarchy will have observed, it is William, the Prince of Wales, the heir. The man who has spent the last 4 years quietly, methodically, consolidating the operational authority that will one day be constitutionally his by right. William has never publicly commented on Harry's legal battles. Not once. Not after the Mirror verdict, not after the security ruling, not after the newsgroup settlement. He has maintained a studied, disciplined, impenetrable silence across every lawsuit, every appeal, every dramatic courtroom moment. His communications team has said nothing. His office has released nothing. He has attended his engagements, given his speeches, worn his uniforms and his suits, and behaved as though the most consequential royal legal story in living memory simply does not exist. That silence, insiders suggest, is not neutrality. Silence inside the British monarchy has never been neutral. When William says nothing about his brother's security case, when he does not advocate, does not intervene, does not use his expanding operational authority to raise the issue, even privately, even in a way that would never reach the press, he is making a choice. A deliberate, considered, fully informed choice. He is choosing the institution over the individual. He is choosing the crown over his brother. He is choosing the future he intends to build over the past that Harry keeps dragging back into the light. And Harry, from Montecito, watching the appeal rulings and reading the judgments and counting the settlement terms, appears to have finally understood this. Not accepting it. Understanding and acceptance are very different things, and Harry has never been built for acceptance. But I understood it. Understood that the brother who was going to stand beside him, who was, according to Harry's own account and spare, the person who had promised that they would always be there for each other, that brother had looked at the war Harry declared, assessed it with the cold strategic intelligence that the palace had spent decades cultivating in him, and decided that the institution's survival mattered more than the bond. Because in late 2024, something shifted in Harry's public posture. The all-out legal assaults began to quiet. The podcast appearances became less combative, less focused on the palace specifically, and more on broader themes of mental health, veteran welfare, and global humanitarian work. The Netflix projects pivoted away from the direct royal warfare of the earlier Sussex brand towards something softer, more lifestyle-adjacent, more comfortable for an audience that was growing tired of the conflict. Harry did not surrender. Surrender requires a formal acknowledgement of defeat, and Harry is constitutionally incapable of that. But he stopped advancing. He stopped pressing the line. The legal war, for now, has reached a kind of frozen front. Neither side was victorious. Neither side fully retreated. Harry can point to the Mirror verdict and the newsgroup apology and say, truthfully, that he extracted accountability from an industry that had believed itself untouchable. The establishment can point to the security ruling, the failed appeals, the settled lawsuits, and say, equally truthfully, that the institutional framework it spent centuries building absorbed everything Harry threw at it and remained standing. But on points on the scoreboard of institutional power that the British establishment has been keeping since long before Harry was born, William is ahead. The man who said nothing, who attended his engagements, who wore his uniform and shook his hands and smiled his careful smile. He is ahead, and Harry knows it. Whatever he says in future interviews, whatever platform he builds, whatever cause he champions, he knows it. So where does this leave Harry now? What is the long game for a man who wagered everything on his family's comfort, his financial security, his public reputation, his relationship with his father and his brother, on the belief that the British legal system and the British public would ultimately hold the establishment to account? He is a man who is right about some things and wrong about the most important thing. He was right that the press had acted unlawfully. The courts confirmed that. He was right that the culture of phone hacking had penetrated further into the establishment than the initial prosecutions suggested. The settlements and verdicts confirmed that. He was right that the institution had managed his departure in ways that prioritized its own survival over his well-being and his family's safety. History, and his own very well-documented account of that period, confirms that. But he was wrong about what winning would look like. He imagined, or perhaps he hoped, that winning in court would translate into winning in the broader cultural and institutional sense. That a verdict in his favor would shift the balance of power. That the palace would be forced to respond, to accommodate, to make space for a version of royal life that could include him and Meghan on terms that were genuinely theirs. He was wrong. The institution absorbed the verdicts, the settlements, the revelations, and the headlines. And it continued. It always continues. That is what institutions do. And here is the long-term calculation that Harry now faces, sitting with that reality in California while the months and the years pass, and William's authority inside the institution grows with every state visit and every Commonwealth engagement and every carefully managed public appearance alongside his own children. When William becomes king, and that day, given Charles's health challenges, is perhaps not as distant as it once seemed, the man who controls Harry's children's relationship with their royal heritage, their titles, their access to the institution, their place in the broader national story, that man will be the same man who watched Harry's legal assault from behind palace walls for years, and chose, deliberately, as a matter of considered institutional strategy, to do absolutely nothing. The distance between the two brothers is no longer just geographical. It is not merely the 5,000 miles between Montecito and Windsor. It is constitutional. It is institutional. It is rooted in a fundamental divergence of purpose that became clear in 2020 and has been hardened, case by case, ruling by ruling, settlement by settlement, into something that may well be permanent. The monarchy that William is building, the slimmed-down, camera-ready, carefully controlled, relentlessly managed institution that he is, in practical terms already running, has no seat reserved for a duke who sued the establishment. There is no architecture in William's vision of the modern crown for a brother who put the institution in the witness box and made it answer questions under oath. The seat does not exist. William did not leave a space for it. He may once have meant to. He may, on some level, still wish things had gone differently. But the space is not there. Harry built the most dramatic, most consequential, most fully documented exit from the royal family in living memory. He did it on his own terms. He wrote the book, he gave the interviews, he went to court. He won some of it and lost more of it than he expected. And now he lives with the quiet, daily reality of what that cost. The question he now has to answer not publicly, not in a Netflix series or a podcast or a memoir, but privately, in the silence of a house in Montecito, with no palace advisors and no security briefings and no institution to define who he is whether the exit was worth it. Whether the verdicts justified the war. Whether the apologies were worth the estrangement. Whether the truth, which he fought so hard to make public, changed anything in the way he believed it would. I do not think he has answered that question yet. I think he is still living inside it. But I want to ask you, do you believe Harry's legal battles changed anything? Did he move the needle on press accountability, on royal transparency, on the way Britain's most powerful institution is held to account? Or did the establishment win from the very beginning, knowing it would outlast him, outmaneuver him, and outlive the moment, and Harry never stood a real chance? Comment below. Tell me what you actually think, not what you want to be true, what you think the evidence shows. Because this is the kind of conversation this channel was built for. And if you want more forensic analysis like this, more of the detail that the mainstream coverage buries, more of the institutional machinery that operates behind the public-facing drama, then subscribe now. Turn on your notifications, because the next video is already coming. And the story of what William does with the power he is quietly accumulating is far from finished. And neither, it turns out, is Harry.